welcome to all of you for being here today and looking forward to a good discussion. I was looking over the topics beforehand and surprisingly they're all closely related to each other. So whatever we hit on, we're liable to step on the toes of the next topic, but that's okay. And anyway, our first topic for discussion today is the content, little heck, my mouth organized. The concept of you're going to react the way you train. And this is sometimes a sore spot for some styles, because I know some stuff, and I'll talk just about jujitsu. There are some jujitsu where they do beautiful kata, and they'll have, and I've seen some kata competitions where they work in teams of two and everything is prearranged and they look absolutely beautiful because they've practiced their routine for competition, but they can't fight their way out of a paper bag. And then you go to the other extreme where there's a lack of quote unquote finesse in technique execution, but they're effective. They never get in a wet paper bag. No, the tech, and I'm not going to pick on Katsugo because I know this is one. You look at Katsugo techniques and you say, how does that work? It looks so, I don't want to say, I'm not going to say sloppy because it does work, but they look so non-traditional that you say, how can it work? And yet it does. So, like, and you know, you don't, and people get into martial arts for different reasons. That's a case as well. So does anybody want to respond to the initial comment? You're going to react the way you train?
Well, I've got a question.
Sure.
These other quote unquote sloppy schools, are you talking about competitive schools, or are you talking about they're form-based, but they don't have the formal kata as the other schools?
Okay. It's not that it's competitive based schools. You know, we're going to go into tournaments and win, and that's what shows our system is effective. It's that the techniques, it's how you train. If you train at just perfecting techniques and being able to execute them beautifully, or whether you train with techniques that may not look as aesthetic, but they work. Am I making myself clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And who just joined? Chris is joining us. Okay.
Chris.
Morning, Chris. And so
Good morning.
yeah, that's the difference. Chris, we're getting into you going to react the way you train. And so the issue is how do you react means how do you react on the street? And that's the issue because if at least to my thinking, if you are always training in an idealistic situation, in my book, that's not going to work on the street necessarily. It may.
It could, yes, it could, yes.
It's
George, so the interesting thing is when I'm teaching, like first off, like the word reaction, I encourage people to not use the word reaction. And when the word comes up in our class and I say, like, when you react, I say, here's one of our lessons is we train so that we respond. So a reaction is one thing, right?
yes.
We know we have a reaction. Somebody throws a punch at you, you catch a glimpse, and you block. That's a reaction. However, if we see a threat approaching us, or if something is coming into our path, one, we have our situational awareness, so we know it's approaching. And two, we start preparing for how we might have to mitigate or manage that approach, or even say even a threat. So I say we always choose to respond. Our first strategy is breathing. Just, be in your relaxed and ready position, regulate your breathing, continue to take in sensory information, and choose how you will respond. And then when I'm teaching, a wrist locks or joint locks, I teach one or two or three. And then I go like, yeah, these are really cool. But you need to know, let's say, a dozen, because somebody is going to pull away out of one or two or three. And if you end up standing and grappling, you still need to have more techniques to be able to control the situation. So it's like you're going to try one or two things that works great here in class, but it won't work on any number of individuals in a life situation. So variety. So that's my first approach to that.
Okay. And you're kind of going down the outline here, which is what are your automatic reactions?
Mm-hmm.
The second subtopic was what are viable options? And third is developing mushin and Hicks law, which is below.
Yeah.
And are there conflicts in techniques, or do you have in a street situation, do you have the option of making choices? Which in the heat of the moment, in my book, you don't. It's whatever happens, happens.
That happens, yeah.
And um, so the question is, how do you, it goes back to, you're going to react on the street the way you train. So I don't, is there any disagreement on this or
Um, my take on that is no, you don't. From what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, kata is the fundamental way of doing the technique. And the way you use that to face the variations you'd face on the street is you don't necessarily stick to it that way. You don't work off of the technique, but you work off of the principles that you gain when you practice the techniques. Okay. Not everything's going to be picture perfect, and we should practice working with variation. In our school, we have something called applied jujitsu, which is you get into the middle of a circle and people attack you randomly, and you just react.
we used to do that when we have a larger dojo and more people around the same rank. And I think you bring up an important point, is that if there's nothing wrong with perfecting kata, but you have to realize that if you're in a what do you call it, unknown situation, if all you're experiencing is dealing with an ideal situation, and you run into someone who's resistant or grabs you differently or attacks you differently from the quote unquote kata approach, is your skill level such that you can modify what you're doing and be successful? And that's
George. So the interesting thing, like the kata, like here in our practice, I teach hard form, but I also teach a soft form, which in Japanese we call taikyo, which is tai chi. So we do a soft form, we do a hard form. I focus a lot on meditation and regulation. But George, you said something about you mentioned ideal situation. The interesting thing is I went back and as I studied what Professor Jigoro Kano said about kata and judo, and Gichin Funakoshi said about Shotokan karate and their kata, is that their intention was that their kata was a means of rehearsing these techniques that you could apply in different situations. So the kata is a means of learning your art. It's also a means of demonstrating what your art is. Like if you say, what is your style? You could perform a kata, you can say, this is our style. It defines who we are. Um, and of course, now that is the ideal situation where you walk through your techniques in a kata form, in a soft form. But then in real life, everything just gets speeded up and there's going to be some variance. But you always want to be able to go back to your gold standard, and your gold standard would be the kata, which is understanding the movements. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah,
Mhm.
because unless you have a good understanding of what you're doing, you can't deal with variations on it that conflict with the ideal execution of that technique.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. And my initial concern is there are some systems that only work with the ideal and never put their students in a training situation where they have to I say it, things have gone south, now what do I do? And that is what, at least in my book, is so necessary. Students occasionally need to be faced with that because that's what develops their, I don't know whether you call it the hard part of the art, or that's what develops their ability to uh, function when things go south. Because that's in my book, at least, that's the critical element on the street, because on the street, lots of stuff goes south. Um, I mean, I've had a few students in street situations, and their quote unquote kata has worked beautifully. They never, it just, and they were surprised at the damage they did to their attacker, which is another issue we may get into today. But they were able to do that because they had been trained to deal with unanticipated situations, or the attack is not being done the way I was taught. Or
So, George, what's interesting now is as we talk about this, I'm coming now. I appreciate Aikido, and I practice Aiki Jujitsu, but like our Aiki Jujitsu is more like the full contact
yeah,
Aiki Jujitsu. But what's interesting is like there's a gentleman on YouTube, and I forget his name right now, but he wanted to study Aikido, so he did, and he got a black belt, and that was great. He must have had money because he built a beautiful dojo, and then he just waited for the students to come pouring in and receive his knowledge, but nobody came. So then he went out into the world and he said, "Well, I'm going to take my Aikido to the world." And then as soon as he got out and started sparring with martial arts practitioner and other combatants, he was getting, he was pummeled. He was getting pummeled. He was absolutely defenseless because his Aikido was really just a very nice demonstration art, totally choreographed with a partner. And then he got into the real world and realized, oh man, like this is absolutely useless. I forget the name of the YouTube channel or the guy, but that's the story. That's the scenario there where you're trained in very rehearsed situations and it's not applicable. It's not transferable to any self-defense strategy
yeah. I mean,
in that scenario.
yeah. My only concern here is that if students train only in perfecting the kata of their art, I've seen some phenomenal karate demonstrations, you know, where you can see all the kata being done in the blocks, etc., yada yada yada. I'm not knocking it down, and it looks beautiful because that's an ideal situation. And um, the and maybe that's, for the person in Aikido, he got that element of Aikido down,
Mm-hmm.
and it is beautiful to watch. But there are times if you have I say, if you have a uke who's pre-recorded, lack of a better phrase, to the whole routine, they will sometimes get ahead of the tori, the person doing the technique, and then you realize, is this real?
Yeah.
And to an extent, it is real, but it's so choreographed that it's become, I don't know, artsy. And I've even seen that. I've even, like I said, a long time ago, we had one when I was in the UK. This is maybe 30 years ago. We had a dojo that wanted to come in. Their demonstration was to drum music, and it was so well choreographed that it was painfully obvious that the uke was taking falls in the techniques before the actual technique was actually executed.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
see. I've seen that. Yeah.
and that to me is where the whatever art it is falls apart. And I said my concern is with that tori, if that's all they can do is just pure kata, unless that's all they're training for, which is okay, are they going to be able to effectively defend themselves on the street?
George, I think there's value in both. For doing kata the way we think of it in karate, I the value there is it's doing muscle memory,
Yes,
training muscles to do the response, so it's automatic. We don't have to think about it. But then uh, a couple of us have already mentioned putting people in a circle. They don't know what the attack's going to be, or at the tournaments where it's unfortunately named freestyle kata. Um, but again, they don't know what the attack's going to be, but they're not grappling. They're not trying not to defeat the other. They're just responding to whatever the attack is in the moment. And that changes the way the mind and the spinal cord respond and how quickly can they respond. So they put the two together. You need one, so you've got the muscle memory there to do the technique, but then you've also trained your mind to be able to respond quickly to something you didn't expect.
right. I agree with you. That's I'm not negating the value of kata. You need to be able to walk before you can run. Although small kids start out running before they can walk. And they go,
I would say you have to have a practical realism involved.
yeah, let me get spam. Okay, that was fast. Yeah, what did you just say, Tony?
So you have to have a practical realism involved when you're doing your techniques. If there is no practical realism to it, how are you going to apply that out on the street?
Okay, so what you're just a second here. Hello? Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. You too. One of our dogs is going in for surgery on Monday. Those are the pre-op instructions. I'm sorry.
Life continues.
Life continues.
Hey,
Vets,
family is important. That's part of our core values. Family.
vets are expensive now. But yes, they are a member of the family. In any case, yeah, I think you have to have you have to have some sort of reality to what you are learning. And uh and I think the intent of all of this here is that yes, we will teach kata, but we also want to teach the reality or the ability to use it without thinking about it. And that's where the practice, as Tony said, and I think Ken has also said, that's where the value of constant practice comes in, so that it becomes almost an automatic reaction. Which takes us into the next topic, which is Hick's law. Who gave me that term? Was it someone who's here now? Hick's law basically says that the more choices you have, the longer it takes you to make a decision.
Mm.
Okay, and this can apply to anything. And if you're a martial artist in a street situation, if you've learned 20 techniques for a knife attack, straight knife thrust, do you have the time to decide which one of those 20 you are going to use? Or how, or, you know, I mean, and I don't know how many of you have actually been in street situations where you've had to use your art, but you don't have that luxury
Mhm.
unless you're in a controlled situation with your supposed attacker, and even then it's questionable. So the question is now, it says if, for example, if you know 8 ways to escape from a headlock, which one will you choose in the heat of the moment?
And in part, kata helps with that. The training, I mean, going through the techniques help with that. Now, one of the gentlemen mentioned muscle memory, but one rehearsal, kata, practicing technique. So for me, if somebody were to have me in a headlock, inst I would say instinctively, although it's trained, I would know which direction I would want to turn. I would have a sense of where their weakness is and where my greatest opportunity is to maneuver. So for me, when you practice enough techniques and you do them as real as possible, in a situation, your instincts you will react with your instincts to respond to that particular situation because you know what's right in that situation for me, if that makes sense,
Chris,
right?
I'm going to pick on you because your eyes moved, which indicated you're thinking, and you've been sitting there silently so far.
Well, this is related to the first topic, right?
Yeah,
And
I mean, even if we're into the second, all of these topics are related today.
yeah,
And they're going to slide in and out from each other. I'm kind of like I've kind of gone down to Hick's law now because it's seems like a logical place to deal with this particular issue, and then we'll end up with where's your center because that comes from that. Even all these topics just evolve one into the other. It's kind of like practicing kata, and then you're in a street situation, and now you've got to take bits and pieces from your various kata to put it into something that works for you in that particular situation.
yeah. So Sensei, the whenever I see or I hear, there's 8 or 10 ways, to get out of a headlock or whatever the situation is. I don't, I view things a little bit differently. So I don't think of it that way. I think there's probably just one way to do it, maybe 2 ways tops, and everything else is a different way to apply that same concept. So to me, it's just physics. partly chemistry, right? But it's the physics, it's the science of it, you know, it's unbalancing a person or, you know, loosening up some other way so that you can deliver whatever technique that you were going to do. And that's what I've learned over time is it it's a concept we're trying to apply because science should be universal anywhere you are on the planet, right? It should work the same way. That's what makes it science. How we execute that, how we apply it, how we integrate it, that's the style, you know, that's the creativity, that's the adaptation. uh so it's like musical notes, you know, or the alphabet, you know, how many letters do we have? But when you look at how many words we have, how many books we've written and things like that, it's like an infinite number potentially, and it keeps increasing. But at its core, it's made up of, you know, very containable and identifiable components. So every headlock situation, we're talking about headlocks, every headlock situation I know of or have seen or whatever, and I've seen probably over 100 different ways to do the same thing. Um, they're all trying to do the same thing, you know, from a scientific perspective, is basically one to make sure you're still breathing, you know, so, you know, situate yourself and then get them off balance somehow and pry yourself free, whether that involves dropping them, hitting them, you know, or just loosening them so you can squeeze out, or all the above. Those are just different endings to the same application of science. So then going back to having, you know, you have 10 techniques, which one do you apply? Of course it's a problem, you know, talking about Hick's law. I often describe it like a little bit differently, like a toolbox, or if you have a bag, you know, that you're carrying. If you only have one tool in there and something happens and you need to do something with that tool, you don't even have to think what you have in there. You only got that one thing. So you can reach in without even looking, very quickly, hopefully grab it, pull it out. If you're a master at using that tool, then you'll be able to apply it even in situation it wasn't specifically designed for and still make it work. If you have 10 tools in there, now not only do you have to think about which one is going to be best for this situation, but even if you can do that very quickly, you still have to reach in and grab the right tool. So you might have to go through 9 other ones potentially to reach that magical 10th tool, you know, to pull it out. And that's what makes it um unrealistic. So so if we just think of it from a scientific perspective and then we look at the training, right? I think we're at a point in history where we have enough data to know what kind of training is more effective, you know, than not. And all the pieces are great. You know, those of you that know me know I teach everything that was talked about, from kata to, you know, we call them simcoms. It was a term from law enforcement, you know, where you throw somebody and surround them and everybody attacks, or randori, you know, type of situations. Uh, what has, nothing is absolute, but what has the greatest yield, and this is why the police and military and everybody, those kinds of institutions do it, is drills. You drill people, you know, for repeating the same type of thing over and over and over again. Then you change the situation around them and make it more dynamic, but they're still being drilled for the same technique. Sports teams work the same way. You know, every successful application works that way. The challenge with martial arts, as what we're talking about from a martial arts dojo perspective, is the term itself, martial arts. It's like the worst interpretation, you know, of what it actually is. A martial arts dojo isn't teaching martial arts. They're not teaching military arts. If they were teaching military arts, the training that is involved with that would go hand in hand, you know, with that type of drilling, live fire, you know, live blades, whatever whatever it calls for. Budo does not directly translate to martial arts. So many years ago, whenever the first person decided to use that, it wasn't a correct interpretation. And in the dojo, we're potentially training people for many different things, kind of how to live a healthy lifestyle, that teamwork, self-defense, physical fitness. So that's all great, but how it suffers is it's different than, well, I'll use something from a martial arts perspective. Like you look at like a Krav Maga type of a thing. There's nothing really special or different about any of the techniques or anything like that. But it gained a reputation, at least a while back, for being very effective in self-defense. Well, when you look at it a little bit closer, it has to do with the way they train, because that's what they're doing is drills. It's very simple, very straightforward, very little thinking involved. And it's great because it's designed for a specific type of purpose. The problem with things like that is that it's like the old saying, if hammer is all you got, everybody looks like a nail, right? So that's what you're going to do. So it's hard to accomplish those other things we're trying to teach, along the way, that budo, that lifestyle, training type of thing. And even if you look at law enforcement, you got your like your SWAT team, right? And their training is very specific for a very specific purpose. Military has their own. You have your Army Rangers, you got your Navy SEALs, you got your Black Ops teams, and they're all very narrow in their focus. And that's what they drill for. That's what they train for. So they end up being really great at that. But it presents a challenge when you have to do a peacekeeping effort, or something like that. So if you look at the number of techniques, that you have, and you look at the core science behind it, it's probably just a handful or less, even if you look at the whole curriculum. Everything else is a permutation, of that. And so for me, that's kind of, what I've seen over the years, both in personal experience, in teaching, continuing to teach, and interacting with different agencies and, different groups. Those are the commonalities. Uh, the biggest challenge for us is we pitch it as like a martial art, literally means, military arts, and we try to be a Swiss Army knife, something for everybody. I got students that are above 80 years old, and I got students like that are 4 years old. So do I teach 10 different things, or do I teach one thing but I package it differently for each age group? If I train the same way for everybody across the board, it's not going to work. you know and if I try to be everything for everybody, that's not going to work either. So anyway, long answer to a short question, but
Uh-huh.
Dan, go for it.
Yeah, okay. I have a rebuttal, but if anybody else wants to go first, please jump in. Okay. So I certainly mostly agree with everything Chris said. I particularly like the part about Kazushi breaking balance. Like there's so many ways to do things. One, break balance. Two, look for the weak point. And so as Chris was speaking, I was thinking about the interesting scenario whereby we say how many ways we could, I don't generally teach how many ways to break out of a headlock, but since we're on that as a good example, it's not even so much about how many ways are to break out of a headlock. It's like how many ways could you be attacked where somebody could attempt to put you in a headlock. Now, so here's an intro without to Reader's Digest version. I was volunteering as a drunken, disorderly participant in role play for police academy students, and they had to come in and put me in handcuffs. So I'm having great fun with it. It was on St. Patrick's Day. So I'm having great fun. So I'm playing drunken Irishman. And So the sergeant in charge of the role play must have taken the last group outside and said, you know what? Nobody's getting these guys in handcuffs. They're all over us. Go in hot, go in hard. I can only imagine that's what he said. Because the next group came in, we're doing our usual thing. We're just jolly having fun. But this big guy, I'm barely 5'6". So this big guy who's 6'3", he comes in and automatically they don't come into, hey, we're the police, what's going on? They immediately came in attack mode. And this big guy attacked me from behind and he just rushes right in. He grabbed me around the face from behind. So he's got his elbow around my face and he immediately yanks on my head. So I'm attacked from behind by surprise, but I'm not expecting it. I'm expecting a police interaction and then resisting arrest. So my point there is we never know how somebody is going to attack us. So we kind of prepare for, you don't know what they're going to do. So that's why we need at least a variety of techniques. So that's my point there. The other interesting thing is I do a program at King Haven Treatment Center for young men who have always wanted to do martial arts. It was their childhood dream, but they never did. They're in a recovery center, but they're in good health, good athletes. And when I say to them, how would you throw a punch, or how would you grab somebody, or how would you attack? The things I see for me are mind-boggling, and I go, would you actually really do it that way? I see everything from an overhand grip that would put yourself in a very vulnerable position to a full body tackle. So people will do crazy, what we would consider crazy things. And part of what we train for is like, expect anything crazy. And I think Mike Tyson said it best. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So we always have to carry that one away. Anyway, that's my 2 cents, guys.
Okay. Just some comments from both you and Chris. When I taught jujitsu in junior high, I would probably get hit in the face probably once or twice a semester by kids. And as I've probably said before, I mean, the worst I ever got was a cut lip and something like that. But the point is, and don't take this wrong, I think everybody should be hit in the face once in a while because it really
4 broken noses.
But the value is it gives you the experience of being hit in the face so that it isn't as, what the term is, it isn't as shocking or debilitating. Because you know what it feels like. And that's not to say it's not going to hurt. And unfortunately, we can't do that in the dojo because nobody would put up with it in our civilized society. And I say that in a questionable manner, which is why those of us that are in the dojo are in the dojo. But it's, the closer you can get to reality, the better your students are trained. I have one of my black girls who has one of those electric shock knives, which is about as close as you can get to using a real knife without cutting your students up. Or some dojos will use marker pens and chalk sticks and various other things. Yeah, you've been cut here, but and this is an entirely different issue. The more realistic you can make your attacks, the more effectively your students will learn. And yes, you may go back to, as Chris has said, well, you've got to do, and even as Seki said, if someone puts you in a headlock, for lack of a better attack, you're not going to, your first move is not going to be to try and get your head out of the headlock because it's being held there securely. You've got to do something, or it's maybe a distraction technique or two. And that is where I've seen many times where students, they know how to get out of the headlock, but they they don't know the availability of distraction techniques that would allow them to maybe more easily or successfully get out of a headlock. And that's part of the hard part of training. The other issue is, and I know this from being a school teacher and having taught seminars, as I'm sure Chris has, some of you have. If I go somewhere to teach a seminar on knife defenses, I'm not going to spend 2 hours dealing with if someone puts a knife around your neck from behind. I mean, I can teach a lot of techniques, but after a while, that information, even if it's recorded on video and all this other stuff, after a while, that information goes in one ear and out the other eye. You know, the human mind can only accept so much information on a single topic. So if I do knife, and this goes back to the variety of techniques here, I may teach only maybe 2 or 3 techniques for a knife in the throat from behind. And I'll say, okay, let's do first slash. You have to change, even if it's just knife attacks, you have to change the situation, because that's what keeps that's what keeps the mind active. I was at one seminar somewhere where I was a guest instructor, and I ended up with a group. My topic was knife techniques. And what did I end up with? I ended up with I guess it's called a platoon of Army people. Or, there are 8 or 10 of them, all from the same military group. And I started off showing them knife defense. They said, well, we thought this topic was going to be on how to attack with a knife. Because they wanted, I said, well, what do you know? I said, okay. No one let me, cool, I'm going to teach a bunch of Army people.
So it's funny.
It's funny, but you have to be, and I've actually showed them, what's the most effective way to get a knife to the heart, or, I mean, I was able to do some of this stuff because I said,
totally.
My next question is, what would you like to learn?
Yeah.
And as an instructor, that meant I had to have some understanding of human anatomy, and thank God I did. And vital areas and all this other neat stuff. And it turned out to be a really good session. But that was not my plan.
But a great topic, though. I'm excited already.
Yeah, I mean, how do you attack a person with a knife successfully?
But we know that. We know how to do. We know how to get inside a guard for the most part.
Yeah.
We're at least trained in hand-to-hand combat and how to get in and throw a strike. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I never served in the military, but you have to look, I guess, maybe in order to defend it against, for example, weapon or any attack, you'd have to know the various ways of doing that attack. And that goes back to Chris. There are various ways to hit a person in the mouth from different angles, and but you have to know how to hit a person in the mouth.
Yeah.
Or the nose in your case.
Yeah. I think I could put together a good program now on teaching knife attack.
Yeah, I mean, but you're probably going to get in a lot of legal trouble too.
I would. I think I might lose my my partnership with the city of Abbotsford.
Right.
That. Yeah.
We're going to get Dave Clark in here, who I don't know how long he's been sitting around waiting, but I just noticed that at the top of the page. Dave, your microphone isn't on either. No audio, no video. But anyway, that's and so perhaps the issue becomes, I mean, when I could teach 20 techniques for a knife attack or variations, and ultimately, by the time a student gets to black belt, they probably, even if it's just a knife of the throat, they probably know at least 8 or 10 techniques.
Hey.
I don't expect them to be good at all of them. But the reason I teach them is, or teach that many, is because they will find 1 or 2 that really work well for them. And to me, one of the nice things about jujitsu is that, because at least the way I was taught from Seki is it's for self-defense. So you have to make that bag of tools available, and they will learn which tools work best for them. And it's all still within the art.
That's a very important point, George, is because certain things we have a large, for all of us, we have a large base of knowledge of techniques. But as Chris said, you're going to teach some things differently to a different demographic. But
Right.
also certain things are going to work differently for different people. And I tell people, you know what? Pick your style, pick what works for you, pick what you're comfortable with, right? What feels good for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I've taught for a while for the school district, I was teaching self-defense, actually for teachers. But it wasn't, self-defense against your kids. It was, for street situations. And one of the things that, one of the issues was, if you tell people where, if someone attacks you, you just take your 2 fingers and poke their eyes out. Most people won't do that because they don't want to blind because ultimately you blind the person, perhaps permanently. But they have no problems scratching across the eyes. So and this goes back to Chris again, sometimes it's not what you do or how you teach, not what you do or what you teach, but how you teach it. See, Chris, you've opened a whole new sack of tools. But and so sometimes it's it's like pulling hair as a technique. How many of you know how to correctly pull hair?
Well, we do,
What do
yeah,
you
we
do?
do, yeah, we in our judo can in our
Very
in
good,
our
Chris.
in our Judo Canada self-defense program, certified program, we teach ways of escaping a hair grab from
Yeah.
behind. So we teach us that. And again, it comes down to orientation and knowing how probably, right, the greatest probability of how to turn, how to escape, etc. Yeah.
Well, I've taught several ways to get out of hair grabs, but the other question is, how do you properly grab the hair on a person's head, assuming they have hair, which I don't have much anymore, and some of us are working hard at becoming bowling balls. Uh, but how do you properly grab hair to make it an effective control hold?
Sensei, my grandfather was a wrestler when I was old enough to, kind of understand different kinds of, doing things. I asked him, "Hey, what kind of wrestling, do you do?" He goes, "I don't know." He goes, "It's we call it catch wrestling." And I said, "Well, what's like the core thing?" He goes, "You just catch what you can, you know,
Yeah.
and whatever's available, you just grab it and then just apply whatever technique you were going to do." So it was interesting, and it taught me a lot, because yeah, whether it's hair or whatever, whatever you can get your hands on that's available, and sometimes that's the problem with techniques is it's designed, every technique works under ideal conditions. I don't care how bad the technique is. If it's ideal and the timing is right, it'll work. But if you get fixated on the technique, and which means grab this, do that. And if the situation doesn't line up that way, then it's even the best techniques are not going to be applicable. So you have to just improvise on the spot and kind of grab what you can. And then whatever that situation yields itself to as far as a technique, then you just apply that. So you got to kind of be flexible about with it. When you think about like if you watch judo drills or competitions, that's kind of how it is. They're just getting a feel of each other's balance and reaction to Kazushi attempts, and then they're just doing whatever techniques, and it's never clean. Like if you ever watch a competition,
Yes.
it's rarely clean. In fact, the person executing the technique usually goes down with it. But that's what it is. So you can't be fixated on just this way. I've gone back and forth with kata over the years. I think that it has a lot of value, but that's what it is. It's drills. If you try to apply it as self-defense, just like in the kata, you're probably going to be in trouble unless it plays out exactly like that, which is, probably not going to happen in most situations. But it's a great drill. So if a kata has, for example, like I'm thinking of a karate or a kobudo kata, if it has, say, 50 moves in it, those 50 moves are probably distilled down to, 5 or less actual response routines, and they just kind of repeat in different places in the kata. That's how you end up with those, 50 moves. So you have those five, let's just say five self-defense responses. And so every time you do that kata, you're practicing that five multiple times throughout the kata, but it's a solo drill, right? And then you compare up with somebody and pull those five out, and then drill against an actual person, in like yakuzuku, like a prearranged, format to minimize injury. And then the next level would be somebody who's actually resisting and not just playing a part. And then the next level after that would be more juyu, where it's a more free, type of an exchange. So you don't know what they're going to do. But you're still trying to apply, those five things. If you practice that way, kata has a lot of value because there's a natural progression to it. But if you just get stuck in doing the forms, it still has a lot of benefit, health benefits, strength, breathing, muscle control, relaxation, focus. And if a self-defense situation comes up and you can apply it, then that's great. But it's not a complete thing if you want like kind of the self-defense and combat application. You got to change you got to add your train to the solo training to get to that point. So it's all good. It's just, what you want out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, uh, grabbing body hair properly was something I learned from Katsugo, and head hair properly and there is a proper way to do it, and it works amazingly well if you do it right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many fights
Slide your hand.
I broke up at the junior high, or even in controlling some adult gang members uh, by the hair on the back of their heads. Um, and it worked very effectively.
The learned technique, George. Most people aren't going to attack you the way you teach it.
Right.
That's the interesting part.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, all you can do is create as many situations as you can. But I think, as Chris has said, and I think even as Ken has said, is if you understand the concept of the technique, you have a better chance of effectively defending yourself in a real situation, because you're going to see those opportunities come up, and your body will, if you are trained sufficiently, you've done the drills, you know what to do, the whole 9 yards, you'll try that to see if it works, and odds are it will, because you've trained with it enough. You know what it feels like when and part of it is because you've trained enough or drilled enough, you know what it feels like when the technique is properly executed, not only as the attacker, but also as a person, the defender. It isn't rocket science for you anymore. I should say, it isn't rocket science for you any longer. Dave, you've got to change that T-shirt.
What's Dave wearing?
Next to the last word next to the last word should be experienced.
I love it, Dave. I love it.
Sorry, it's the one that came out of the suitcase today.
Oh.
Forgot I had it on till now. Can you read it all the way?
Yeah.
Read the whole thing.
Okay, yep.
Well, none of us
George.
act our age.
Doesn't that mean the same thing as a man never stands in the same river twice?
Yeah, that would
Yes.
be, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
well, if you look at it that way, it's really not that bad.
George,
I learned how to not act my age my first year of teaching public school.
Yeah.
Uh,
George, the other interesting thing about this whole thing, we're talking about engaging in combat, and suppose it's defending yourself,
Right.
defending against attack. The interesting thing is, if we said, these are generally, we teach 20 techniques in this class, and these 20 techniques are generally considered to be the most successful techniques for defending against an attack that might occur in public. But again, it still comes down to the fact that if we go in a nice, safe practice environment in a classroom, we run through all the 20 techniques and everybody's great. But again, if we don't know if that's why when I teach stuff, it says you've got to be used to getting into people's face, and you have to be used to people getting into your face, get close, striking, because that's a big part when changing the setting, leaving the safety and security of the dojo and then stepping out into the unknown on the street, back alley, or the foyer in a nightclub. That's very different. So it's training to be calm and be responsive in a situation. And for me, the biggest thing is remain calm, be responsive, and apply what appears to be not the most reasonable, but whatever intuitive technique comes forth in that situation.
yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head, since Chris got out the hammer, or someone got out the hammer from the bag. Is one of the things we're trying to help our you don't teach people anything, you help them learn. One of the things we try to help our students develop is a sense of calmness, because that calmness allows them to remain in better control of themselves and more effectively defend themselves. Unless you go totally crazy. And it's amazing how many people who totally lose self-control are successful in beating up their opponent, for lack of a better phrase. And
Unleashed.
Pardon?
Unleashed.
Unleashed. I mean, and that's and I've seen it happen. It's just someone's attacked, they go totally ballistic, and the attacker ultimately decides this was really a bad move.
Yeah.
And but I think, yeah, we do try to teach our students. One of the things, and and that's part of the philosophy of the martial arts. You know, you're always try to remain calm and not get upset and all of these other things. And people who don't develop or learn that skill think, oh, this person is just, they're off in space somewhere. And the other extreme is saying, well, they're very well grounded. And they've got, you know, they seem to be more in control of themselves and you know, their environment. And that's one of the things we try to, I think is one of the more important skills, because if you can remain calm and in control of yourself, you're going to be more successful in a stressful situation.
Yeah.
And that's very hard for a lot of people to do, because our emotions get in the way of dealing with the problem. And it's a very difficult skill to get students to learn. And part of helping students learn this is to put them in random situations, stressful situations, where they can hopefully develop this skill to some extent. But that's an entirely different topic. I got to write that one down. That'll be good for the future. Just bear with me for a second.
You have to tell us what you're writing, though, so we know.
I'm just the only word I've just written down, keeping calm.
Keeping
And
calm, yes, remain calm.
I'll work on that topic.
Yeah.
But
I think experience really is the key to all that. Two different situations in my younger years. I ended up going to a program with DTI, Defensive Tactics Institute, under John Peters Jr. He's teaching side-handled baton. And we had a lot of fun with the class. They brought the shinais out, and you're learning how to do the blocks. And we did some control techniques, not very many. But at the end, everyone figured we were just going to ace the exam. And he came out with axe handles. So big difference in blocking an axe handle compared to
yes.
a shinai. The other was at a Taekwondo studio. And nothing against Taekwondo. I was part of their dojang for about 2.5 years. At one point, they had a sparring competition, and several other brown belts and black belts came out. And they said, well, you're a jujitsu instructor. Do you know anything about this? I said, yeah, I've got some experience. So the first thing they did is the guy threw a high kick, and I did a spinning sweep on his leg. And they said, you can't do that.
Can't is an operative word.
Anything is legal or illegal, however you look at it. You got to deal with it. You got to get back up off the ground. And you got to deal with it. So that experience makes all the difference.
Yeah. And bring up a key word there, or concept. To me, can't is an operative word. There's no such thing as can't. It's either allowed or not allowed, or you will or you won't, but it doesn't mean you can't. And some systems say, like you said, you can't do that here. And that's with jujitsu people, unfortunately, can't is not a, you know, if it's available, we'll go for it. There are some techniques for potential rape situations that I think I've only taught once or twice, and most people get grossed out with it. But you know, it's what do you do in that, you know, in a situation where a woman is being raped, you know, and there are some things you can do, but yes, they're in other words, they're as gross as hell, and very few people will teach them, because I can't do that. and and I've had women say to me, I can't do that to a man. And my response is, so you're willing to get raped? And that kind of takes them aback, because
Yeah.
you have to, how do you say, we like to think in the martial arts and jujitsu, we like to think we're very moral people, upstanding, et cetera, et cetera. But some of what we are in many cases advocating, because jujitsu techniques are ultimately designed to injure an attacker so that to prevent them from continuing their attack.
Yes.
And that's a really hard thing for some people to accept. And that's when I've had students that have been in street situations, they don't realize, this is a topic that's coming up later, they don't realize the consequences. They don't realize that, number one, they can actually injure a person seriously until it actually happens. And then they feel very bad about doing it. They think they've done something wrong to cause injury to this person, even though it was the other person that attacked them that caused the reversal of the course of events to take place. And because we, as number one, as martial artists, we don't want to hurt another person. And number two, what was the other thing? We don't want to hurt another person. And I can't think what number two is. It was a brain cell disconnection. And that's one of the, it creates a philosophical conflict, because no one, we're taught from little childhood, don't hurt that person, don't do that, it's going to hurt the other person. And yet, in order to successfully protect yourself, there are times when you are going to have to hurt the other person.
That's a great phrase, protect yourself. And when I'm teaching most of my classes, and certainly when I'm teaching self-defense class, I'm emphasizing in order to protect yourself, in order to protect your space, etc. So that's the terminology I often will use, George, is protecting yourself. This is what you have to do to protect yourself. It's not a matter, okay, if you need to do this to that person. No, I don't use that language. In order to protect yourself, this is what you must do.
Yeah. And
that's what it's about.
That's hard. That's hard for some people to accept unless they've been through that type of a situation. And they realize, that, okay, this makes sense now. And it's also hard for them to accept as a philosophy, because they don't want to hurt another person. But for lack of a better phrase, it either comes down to you or them in protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And that's, and most people, once you put it into really simple language, they begin to understand. It's kind of like primal, but they begin to understand, yeah, if I'm going to protect myself, I may have to do some things that I would otherwise never do.
Yeah.
And what I add to that, which is really important, I said, if your attacker was a reasonable human being with reasonable values, they would not be attacking you physically in the first place. And because this person is not acting within normal, rational human behavior, why should you be restrained from doing what is necessary to protect yourself from injury? So you have to, self-defense is ultimately largely physical, but somehow with your students, and it's very hard to do unless they've actually been in a street situation, they have to understand that things are going to happen that may not normally be morally acceptable. But you have, they have to be willing to do that if they're going to survive.
Oh,
And that's a hard concept to get people to
oh, yeah.
accept.
George, I have a thought, and I hope I'm not interjecting too much.
That's okay.
But I have a lady. She's 33 years old. She is Spanish and Chilean. She holds dual passports. She is in Canada on a work visa. She approached me at a day, sort of a public networking day, and she said, "I've always wanted to do something like jujitsu, but I didn't." I said, "Okay, well, why not?" So it took her a while to find the word. I'm afraid. I said, "Okay, good. You're afraid. Okay, well, why don't you come out and try it?" Now, this is a lady who moves very elegantly. Let's say that she was, raised to be a nice, proper little lady. We use that cliche. A nice, proper little lady moves very elegantly, and I have to teach her how to now move like a martial artist, to move like somebody who was a fighter, a contender. So she's been training with us for 6 months. She stayed for 6 months. She's on the verge of getting a green belt. And over the course of that 6 months, I would say I have exposed her to exposure therapy. She's like, "Oh no, no, I'm not very comfortable. Like people being in your face and throwing punches and hitting and twisting somebody's arm and doing all these things." She knew that she wanted to do it, but it was not natural. In fact, it was very unnatural to her nature. But over time and over time and over time, and then she sees other people doing it, she goes, "Oh, wait, now it's just a whole bunch of people here. We're all training, we're all doing this here. And they're really nice. And look, that's healthy and it's active and it's good for you." And then she keeps doing it. And one time she was like, "I don't like people being in my personal space." Well, if somebody comes into your personal space uninvited and hostile and you don't want it, that's sort of what we teach you, not sort of, that is what we train you to respond to. I mean, we have healthy physical activity, it's healthy social activity, we have good fun, it's good exercise, we do mental exercises, but you also need to be able to use this. And I'll tell you this here. So in the scenario where I grab her by her shirt collar and I grab her side pocket and say, "I want your iPhone," when she's able to grab my wrist and effectively put a wrist lock on me and strike me, 6 months later, when she's like, "Oh no, I couldn't do that." And 6 months later, she can wrist lock me and strike me and put me down,
Yes.
such that I'm impressed by it, thinking, "Holy shit, you did that." So that's a long process, right?
Yes. Yes.
That's,
Yeah. And that's,
yeah. This is
I
a
mean,
lady who's like, "Oh, I couldn't do that. Never. No."
yeah, I mean, it's, I've seen that happen numerous times
Yeah.
for lack of a better phrase, you have this petite young thing who you would not want to meet in a dark alley.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and it's not going to take away from that petite young thing personality. It's like, what is it? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Jekyll and Hyde.
Mm-hmm. Jekyll and Hyde, yes,
Jekyll
yeah.
and Hyde.
Yeah.
Uh, when males see the Jekyll and Hyde, they really take, I would tell my girls when I taught junior high and even in park program classes, never tell a guy that you're trying to date that you've had any martial arts experience. Odds are that will be the last date they have with you. Because it's intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of a contradiction, but now I mean, after you get to know the guy for a while, you can say, or you know uh you might want to risk telling them, but it's you have to be, how do you say, you have to be careful what you say sometimes. I mean, when people look at me, they usually don't see a martial artist. but it's there.
Mhm.
And anyway, we're getting off on a side issue here. Let's see how far.
By the way, can I just ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Have you heard about that 13-year-old girl, the jujitsu? She learns jujitsu, and she was able to defend herself against an adult attacker.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. She ultimately, the first thing she did was put him in a headlock, which he was not expecting. And I guess he got on that, and then somehow she managed to sweep one of his feet out from under him, and it knocked him to the ground.
Hmm.
And then she got away.
Mhm.
Yes. She was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu student.
Actually, not Brazil. It was Danzan Ryu Jiu-Jitsu.
The Danzanru? Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh.
And but yeah, I mean, and I'm sure she didn't think of any specific techniques to do. She did what she knew.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that was the point. Yeah.
And the whole point here, I think we're trying to cover today, is that you're not going to do, oh, this person choked me. I'm going to have to elbow him with my left rib. Then I have to come up and grab his arms. Then I have to work my way into a hip throw. And then I'll throw him. And then I'll drop my right knee into the side of his ribs to prevent him from attacking me any further. Okay. None of this mental processing goes on when you are attacked. You just do what you do. And I would probably without a doubt say that's why she was successful, because she had the training to do what she had to do. And she may not even, she was lucky that she remembered what she did. Because in many cases, in a real self-defense situation, the person, you may not remember exactly what they did.
Well, maybe she didn't remember. Maybe
Maybe
she
she
just
didn't.
reacted.
Yeah, and she just it was a response.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's we in Budoshin and we or other martial arts, they call it mushin or no mind. And we've talked about that endlessly before. But yeah, she acted out of it was mushin. She just did it. But it's her training that allowed her to did it. And that's what
Mhm.
her instructor was successful in teaching her self-defense. Because
Yeah.
once you get that concept, I won't say you're okay totally, but you are in much better shape than you would be without those skills. Okay. It is, and the only thing I want to interject here, and this is going to be the last subtopic on Hicks law. There are two issues. One is it valid to say to a student, if they've run through a self-defense situation and they did a particular technique, is it valid for the instructor to say, you should have done this instead?
Mhm.
No. If they got out of it, no, they did what they needed to do.
Mhm.
You're going to undermine their confidence if you tell them, no, you did it wrong. I'm sorry, George. That was
Yeah, I agree.
a
I
little
agree.
too
Yeah.
strong a response.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because that's when I've had students that have been in street situations, they come to me, one of their questions is, did I do the right thing? And my response usually is, you did what you needed to do.
Yeah.
And did it get you out of that situation? Yes. Did you get in trouble? No.
It's all good.
Not good. And again, it's a matter of how do you say, it's a matter of the KISS theory.
Yeah.
And I say, keep it simple for the student. You don't want to get into this complex analysis of, well, what was going through your mind and all this other stuff, because it's all, for the most part, irrelevant.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I mean, they attack you with a hit. How much thinking did that take on their part? No one's going to answer.
Well, the alternative to having not defend yourself can be absolutely devastating.
Yes.
Because, well, let's look at it this way. You're talking about women who say, oh, I can't do that. Well, guess what? After he's done with you, he's going to go after your daughters. You got to deal with it.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They lack of a better phrase, they need a learning experience.
Yeah.
Another way to think about it is that instead of saying that I do the right thing, is what could I have done differently?
Okay.
Right. Because that leads potentially to a different thought process. And, if the answer is nothing under the same circumstance, hindsight's always 20/20. So
Yes.
you can't get caught up with that too much, except for future reference. But yeah, what could you have done differently, based on what needed to be done?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good, or rephrase, could you have done anything else differently? Or could you have, the key is not to make it, not to put them on the defensive and say, should you have been there in the first place? I mean, that might be something for a later discussion, but you have to be, if a student has been in a real self-defense situation, you have to be as supportive as possible, because they're coming to you for basically confirmation that they did the right thing. That's one of our burdens as a sensei or an adult or a parent, okay? Or even a boss on a job, they'll come to you and say, did I do the right thing?
And that's where I encourage self-reflection, right? Did you think about it? Did you go back? Why are you asking the question? I don't want to get too philosophical, but well, why are you asking me that? Did you think about it? Did you reflect on it? Did you think of things you could have done differently?
Yeah.
So I always like to encourage self-reflection.
Yeah, that does help. One
reflective practice.
And I've said this before, I try never, and I learned this from an older redheaded Irish, she was an Irish counselor of the junior high school. So I spent a lot of time working in the counseling office, because the principal said if the district, if a counselor was absent, the district would pay for a substitute, and I would go into the counseling office and the substitute would go in and take care of my classroom. And I used to ask kids when they came in, why did you do that? She says, you never ask a person why, because it puts them on the defensive. It's a defensive term. Use the phrase, what were your reasons? Because sometimes that allows them to, it isn't as defensive. What were your reasons for doing that or saying that? And sometimes you find out what actually happened rather than them trying to defend their position. And I found there were times when if two people had a fight, I would say, what were your reasons for fighting them? And I know I've said this before, it would turn out sometimes, and they were both supposed to be suspended from school for fighting. Okay. And it sometimes would turn out that there was one kid who wanted to see them fight, so he started this rumor. And I would ultimately call that one kid in, have him suspended from school. Once I was reassured that two other kids were okay with each other. That's critical. But you know, it's your goal, if you're asking him why, is to get to as factual, truthful an answer as possible. And what were your reasons has a greater likelihood of bringing that correct information out rather than saying, why did you do that? I mean, how many of you have been asked, whether it be an adult or a child, why did you do that?
Well, too often the answer is, I don't know.
I don't know. Or it was his fault, or he started it, or
Right.
I didn't like being called that name, or whatever it was. Okay. And now you know you're in trouble. And so, so I try to avoid, well, I'm not perfect yet. Long way to go. But I try to avoid using the word why.
Why?
What are your reasons?
Just kidding.
What are your reasons for asking me why? I mean, the goal is the same. It's just how people interpret the word why. And that's
Oh, that's kind of interesting. George, I was thinking as you were speaking there about and you're talking about like remaining calm. Like, why did you do that? Why did you react? Why did you act that way? Like those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And you added to your notes there, like for a future topic, calm, remain calm. If you recall, I sent you the attachment a month ago,
right.
the notes from, or speaking notes and points from the program I offer, de-escalation with communication. And that is sort of the precursor to our physical self-defense strategies. It's one, remaining calm, analyzing the situation,
Yeah.
assessing, evaluating threat, and determining next steps. But the remaining calm comes up, that theme comes up repeatedly in that text, de-escalation with communication that I sent you.
And it's amazing if you can keep, and now we're going off into another topic, but if you can keep yourself calm,
Yeah, yourself calm.
one of two things are going to happen. It either really de-escalates the situation, or the other person becomes less calm. I've had that happen on rare occasion because they get frustrated with the fact that you're remaining calm and they're upset. And then they're upset with you because you're not getting upset like they are.
Wait, now we're not talking about marriages now, are we?
But anyway, okay. We only got two topics covered today, but it was a good discussion. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say in conclusion of you're going to react the way you train, or Hicks law, which are both closely related to each other, or something we got sidetracked off onto before we conclude today?
I'd say I don't want to get real philosophical, but I do have one contribution, and that is calm takes you straight into the realm of being. Being is the logical place to go to doing, and doing then results in having. Be, do, have works, and calm will take you straight into being. If you don't go to calm, you have a problem. You may end up doing something that would not be as well advised. And what do you become?
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Have, do, be is the American way. Be, do, have is the Eastern way. We can learn a lot from those Easterns.
Oh, sorry, Dave. What was the Western way you said, Dave?
Have, do, be.
Okay.
I'm going to go buy a surfboard, then I'm going to surf, and then I'm going to become a surfer. Wrong.
Yeah.
Got totally backwards. That's not.
Can I quote you on that one? I like that.
Sir.
Good.
You can quote me just as long as you know that I can't take credit for this form of thinking. It's a result of a lot of reading and a lot of application. And please don't think that because I said these words and they are sage, that I in turn are also sage. I are not.
Sage is also a what do you call it? I don't want to call it a spice. It's a
Herb.
herb.
Yes, and you smudge with it.
You what with it?
Smudging. Get rid of evil spirits or whatever by you light the sage and then put it out, let the smoke go through the house and say,
Oh,
go.
yeah. Oh, yeah, you
go.
use it for that too. Yes, that's,
Yeah.
I was thinking about cooking only, but okay. So now we've got 3 interpretations of sage.
Right.
So you've given us some sage advice.
I should have used the word wise.
Okay. Uh, this topic, before too many people think that jujitsu people have deranged minds.
And George, here's another important concept: laughter.